didn't see her coming. Nobody ever does. It was a Tuesday in late October, the kind of evening that makes Toronto feel like it belongs to a different world entirely. The sky bruised purple over Lake Ontario, the wind cutting through Yorkville like it had somewhere important to be. The Aldemere was the kind of restaurant where the menu had no prices, where the sommelier remembered your preferred vintage from 2 years ago, and where a reservation required not just money, but the right kind of name attached to it. Ottoline Ferreira had worked the floor there for 6 years. 6 years of memorizing dietary restrictions, of carrying plates that cost more than her monthly transit pass, of smiling through comments she was never supposed to hear. She was 41, built like someone who had carried things her whole life. Because she had. She wore her hair pinned back under her shift, kept her nails short and clean, and had a habit of going still when something important was about to happen. Her colleagues called it her reading the room face. The managers called it professionalism. Ottoline called it survival. She had come to Toronto from Montreal 17 years ago with 2 suitcases, a culinary certificate she never ended up using, and a grandmother's voice in her head that said the same thing every time the world tried to make her feel small. You are not what they see. You are what you know. What Ottoline knew could fill rooms. But none of that was visible on a Tuesday night at the Aldemere when a party of 4 was seated at table 9. The corner window table, the one that overlooked the courtyard lights. And the man who led the group looked at Ottoline the way some people look at furniture. Present, functional, and entirely beside the point. His name was Edouard Fontaine-Lebel. If you follow business news in this country, you know that name. If you don't, here's the short version. Third-generation money. A construction empire that ran from Quebec City to Calgary. The kind of wealth that had been aging so long it had developed its own specific gravity. He was 63, silver-haired, and wearing a watch that cost more than the restaurant's wine cellar. He had the confidence of a man who had never once been told no by anyone whose opinion he considered worth having. With him were 2 associates, younger men in suits that tried too hard, and a woman, late 50s, who sat with the particular stillness of someone used to witnessing things she would later pretend she hadn't seen. Ottoline brought the water. She introduced herself. She recited the evening specials in the careful, unhurried way she had practiced until it was second nature. Fontaine-Lebel did not look at her. He was already talking to the man on his left, in French. Quebecois French, fast and clipped, the kind that flows so naturally between certain people that they forget it isn't private. Encore un serveuse noire, he said. Another black waitress. Ils font semblant d'être inclusif, mais au fond c'est juste pour les photos. They pretend to be inclusive, but really it's just for the photos. One of the younger men laughed. A short sound, quickly swallowed. The woman did not laugh. She looked at the courtyard lights. Ottoline did not react. She noted the wine preferences, confirmed the allergy information for the gentleman walked across from Fontaine-Lebel, and walked back to the service station with her spine straight and her face perfectly, professionally neutral. But here's the thing about Ottoline Ferreira, and I need you to stay with me here, because this is the part that changes everything. Her grandmother had been a school teacher in Martinique for 38 years, a woman who believed, with the quiet ferocity of someone who had earned the right to believe it, that language was the closest thing to armor that a person could carry without anyone knowing it was there. She had made Ottoline learn French before English. She had made her read Césaire aloud until the rhythms lived in her body. And when Ottoline was 14, they had visited a family friend in Lyon, and her grandmother had said, "Now you will learn to hear what people say when they think no one is listening." Ottoline heard everything. She served the first course. Fontaine-Lebel spoke again in French while she set down his plate, this time to the woman beside him. Something about the restaurant's decor being trop efforts, pas assez classe, too much effort, not enough class. He gestured vaguely in the direction of the room without looking at anyone in it. The younger men discussed numbers, revenue figures, a contract in Mississauga that was apparently stalled because of a zoning issue someone named Tremblay had failed to anticipate. None of them spoke to Ottoline directly. Halfway through the main course, one of the younger men, The one who had laughed earlier knocked his water glass. Not dramatically. A small spill, barely a splash, but enough to spread across the linen in an obvious way. He looked up, flustered, reaching for his napkin. Ottoline was there in 4 seconds. Calm, efficient, the way she always was. Maladroit, Fontaine-Lebel said under his breath. Clumsy. And then, looking at her for the first time, really looking at her, with that particular species of contempt that doesn't bother hiding itself, he added something in French that was not about the spilled water. What he said, in the French he assumed she would not understand, was, "Ces gens-là sont incapables d'évoluer. On peut leur donner du travail, ça ne changera rien à ce qu'ils sont." People like that are incapable of growth. You can give them work, it doesn't change what they are. The table was quiet for a moment, and then Ottoline Ferreira set down the fresh linen she had brought, smoothed it once along the edge of the table, and looked at Edouard Fontaine-Lebel directly. She said, in French so clean and unhurried it could have been lifted from a broadcast, "Monsieur, je comprends le français depuis l'âge de 4 ans. Je le parle depuis l'âge de 5. Et j'ai entendu tout ce que vous avez dit ce soir, depuis le moment où vous avez pris votre place. Sir, I have understood French since I was 4 years old. I have spoken it since I was 5. And I have heard everything you have said this evening since the moment you sat down." She did not raise her voice. She did not shake. She said it the way her grandmother had taught her to say difficult things. As simple fact, delivered calmly, which is so much more devastating than anger. The table did not move. The younger men looked at the tablecloth. The woman looked at Ottoline with something that might have been, in another context, the beginning of gratitude. Fontaine-Lebel's face did the thing that faces do when the mind behind them cannot find an exit. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He reached for his wine glass. Whether out of habit or necessity, it was hard to say, and his hand stopped halfway there. One of the other tables nearby had gone quiet. The ambient sound of the restaurant continued, the soft collisions of cutlery and conversation. But in a radius of perhaps 15 feet, there was a stillness that felt deliberate. Ottoline said, still in French, "Je vais vous apporter votre dessert. Et je vous suggère, pour le reste de la soirée, de parler de sujets qui méritent une aussi belle table que celle-ci." I will bring you your dessert, and I suggest that for the rest of the evening you speak about subjects worthy of a table this fine. Then she turned, walked back to the service station, and asked her colleague, a young man named David, who had been watching from 10 feet away with his mouth slightly open, to bring her a moment. She used that moment to breathe. Just breathe. Now, I want to say something here, because I think it matters. What Ottoline did at that table was not a performance. It was not, as some people might assume, a calculated move or a rehearsed speech. It was the only response available to someone who had been carrying language as armor for 37 years, and had simply, finally, been given a reason to use it. She told me later, and I want to make sure you hear this, that in that moment she was not thinking about victory or vindication. She was thinking about her grandmother's voice. About being 14 in Lyon and learning to hear what people say when they think no one is listening. The dinner proceeded. Fontaine-Lebel did not speak again in French for the remainder of the meal. Neither did anyone else at the table. The conversation became English, polite, surface level. The kind that people use when they've been reminded there are consequences to words. Ottoline served dessert. She cleared the table. She brought the bill on the small leather folder the Aldenmere used, set it down without comment, and wished the table a good evening. She thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. 2 days later, Ottoline was called into the office of Aldenmere's general manager, a methodical and careful man named Mr. Sébastien Ouellet, who had been with the restaurant for 11 years, and who managed conflict the way a surgeon manages bleeding. Quickly, cleanly, and without drama. He told her that a complaint had been filed, that the guest, Fontaine-Lebel, had contacted the restaurant's ownership group the morning after the dinner and described the interaction as a confrontation initiated by a staff member. He had used the word aggressive. He had suggested that Ottoline's continued employment reflected poorly on the establishment's standards. Mr. Ouellet set a printed copy of the complaint on his desk between them. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at Ottoline. I wasn't there, he said, but David was. And so was the couple at table 11, and the sommelier. He paused. Do you want to tell me what happened? Ottoline told him. Precisely, calmly. Every word Fontaine-Lebel had said, and exactly how she had responded. Mr. Ouellet listened without interrupting. When she finished, he nodded once slowly, in the manner of a man arriving at a conclusion he had suspected for some time. I'm going to need a written statement from you, he said. Don't hold, in your own words. I'll be collecting the same from David and from the couple at table 11, who, as it happens, left their contact information with the host on the way out. He looked at her steadily. You've been here 6 years, Ottoline. In 6 years, have I ever had reason to question your professionalism? No, she said. I didn't think so. He picked up the complaint, straightened it against his desk, and set it in a folder. The restaurant will be responding to Mr. Fontaine-Lebel. Not in the way he expects. What followed was neither quick nor simple, the way these things rarely are. The Aldenmere's ownership group, a family-owned hospitality company based in Ottawa, reviewed the statements. They reviewed the reservation history. Fontaine-Lebel had dined at the restaurant 11 times in 4 years. They reviewed the file that had quietly accumulated around his visits. A wine refusal that had generated a complaint, a disagreement with a pastry chef that had been described as intense by 3 witnesses, a moment with a coat check attendant that had never been formally documented, but had been remembered by everyone who saw it. They also, it turned out, had cameras in the dining room, not recording audio. The law in Ontario is clear about that, but the footage of the interaction at table 9 showed with some precision a man who leaned forward and spoke at length while a woman stood without moving, and then a woman who said something brief and returned to her work. It did not show aggression. It showed the opposite of aggression. The ownership group sent a letter to Fontaine-Lebel. Ottoline was not privy to its contents. What she was told, 3 weeks after the dinner by Mr. Ouellet in a meeting that also included a representative from the company's Toronto office, was this. The complaint had been rejected, in full. A formal note of the incident had been placed in Fontaine-Lebel's guest file, which would determine whether reservations were accepted for his party in future, and the restaurant wished to offer Ottoline, in recognition of the manner in which she had conducted herself, a promotion. The title was floor supervisor, more responsibility, more hours on the days she chose, fewer on the ones she didn't. A salary adjustment that she later described to her sister as finally. She accepted. But here's what I want to tell you about the 3 weeks between that Tuesday evening and the morning. Mr. Ouellet called her into his office for the final time. She didn't know what was coming. None of us ever do in those weeks. When you've done something brave, not recklessly, not carelessly, but with intention and precision and the full weight of who you are. And then you have to go back to work the next day, and the day after that, not knowing if the institution you've given 6 years to will choose the version of the story that protects its most powerful customer or the version that protects you. Those weeks are long. Ottoline told me she slept badly. She told me she second-guessed herself at 2 in the morning, in ways she never did during daylight. She told me she called her sister in Montreal and talked for 2 hours about something other than the situation, because sometimes that's the only way to get through a thing. She also, during those 3 weeks, did something that nobody asked her to do, and nobody knew about until later. There was a young woman who had started at the Aldenmere 4 months prior, 23 years old, first job in fine dining, still learning the particular grammar of a room like that. Her name was Denise. She was quiet, quick to apologize, and had a habit of looking over her shoulder that Ottoline recognized from her own first year on a floor like this one. Ottoline started writing things down for her. Not advice exactly, more like a record. How to read a table. How to hear what's being said and what's being implied. How to respond to a comment that is technically about the service, but is actually about something else entirely. How to carry the information you have without letting anyone see how much of it there is. She called it, not very originally, her notes. She gave them to Denise in a small green notebook she bought at the pharmacy on Bloor Street. Denise has been with the Aldenmere for 2 years now. She's one of the best servers on the floor. The The notes are still in her locker. I think about what it means to carry language as armor. To spend years learning to hear, really hear, the world around you. Not because someone handed you a curriculum, but because you understood early that comprehension is the one thing no one can take from you. Ottoline didn't study French to impress anyone. She didn't learn to speak it with that particular, unhurried precision because she was planning a confrontation in a Yorkville restaurant at the age of 41. She learned because her grandmother told her that knowledge compounds, that what you put in comes back, always, in forms you cannot predict. Edouard Fontaine-Lebel walked into the Aldenmere that October evening assuming, the way people with his specific biography often assume, that the woman refilling his water glass was a surface, something present, functional, and entirely beside the point. He left having learned that the most expensive lesson in any room is the one that arrives without a bill. The next time you sit down somewhere, and the person across from you is holding a carafe, or a clipboard, or a mop, or a telephone, remember what happened at table 9 on a Tuesday in October. Remember that you do not know what that person carries. You do not know what they have heard or learned or survived or chosen. You do not know what language lives in them, or what their grandmother told them when they were 14 years old, or what they are quietly writing down in a green notebook for someone who will come after them. You do not know. And that not knowing, if you let it, is the beginning of respect. If this story reached you, if it meant something, please like and subscribe to Heirloom Tales. Leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Every single one gets read. And if you know someone who needs to hear this today, share it with them. We'll see you in the next one.